Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at Samsung Galaxy Buds Pro. And like all the other Galaxy Buds that I have, I pre-ordered the phone and they give you a bunch of credit which you can use on accessories. And in the past few years, I've used it on the Galaxy Buds. So I've had the originals, the pluses, and now I have the pros. So for those unfamiliar with it, this is the Galaxy Bud Pro. This is the case, which I think is the same case as the Live. I don't have the Live, but I believe it is the same exact case. And it says Samsung on top, sound by AKG, who is their usual tuning unit from Samsung. If you have any other wired headsets from Samsung, they're typically AKGs. So here are the Bud Pros. Quite shiny, and case is super nice. USB-C on the back, wireless charging on the bottom. So very nice package. So where do we start with the Buds Pro? And you almost have to start with the fit because they basically ruined the fit from the old. These are the original Buds. So if we take a look at what the original Buds looked like, it had this little wing, and the wing would actually lock in your ear, which was super convenient. The nozzle was actually offset a little bit, so you could actually throw a compli tip on it. But the wing, for the most part, really held it into your ear. So when we look at the Buds Pro, they changed the shell quite a bit. So I'll get to my tips in a second. But if we look at it in profile, you can sort of see that this is the original Bud, and it has almost a flat shape right here, which lets you insert this quite deep into your ear, and this just kind of rested in your ear. So with the Buds Pro, they add this little hump, which I think keeps you from keep blocking this with your ear. So they offset it a little bit with this little hump, but that hump doesn't let you insert it into your ear deep enough. And there's not really a wing so much. There's this little bump which rests outside of your ear, but they don't have this wing which locks it in your ear. So using the stock tips, which I don't have the stock tip is super flimsy, and I don't have it with me. Hang on one second. So this is the stock tip, and it's a flimsy silicone, but it's shaped, the nozzle is actually oval, so it's shaped like the oval, but it's quite flimsy and it's quite small. This is the large size. So what I had to use was a third-party tip. So this is actually an Avo tip, which is these guys, Avo, which is an old Radio Shack brand. So if we look at what's really happening here, you've got this is the Buds Pro tip, and this is my Avo tip. So you can see that it's basically big enough to get a proper seal inside of my ear, but small enough that it actually charges as well. So the whole magic on this is you need a tip that has a really strong stem in there. You see that green ring in there, how thick it is? You need something that's really going to grab this tiny, because on the Buds Pro, this little nozzle bit right here is actually a little smaller and tiny. And let me just rip this off real quick and show you what it looks like. So this is the Buds Pro version, and it's oval, and yeah, it's kind of a pain to actually get a tip on it, and a very pain to actually get it to stick on there. So with the stock tips, sort of impossible for me to actually get a good fit. I don't know how other people are doing. I don't know how all these reviews got all this great sound, yet the fit for me is actually pretty bad, and it's sort of annoying that they have such a great product but then ruined it because it won't stay in your ear. So on top of all that, when you're going to put these in your ear and they always feel like they're loose, and you go to push it in to get it more secure, it triggers the touch sensor. So every time you touch anywhere on this back face, it actually pauses your music. So oversensitive touch, somewhat annoying as well. So on the good side, active noise control, ambient noise, voice detection, all those are really great if you get a proper fit. And again, some people are saying that the ANC isn't as good as what Samsung said it was 90%. That 90% assumes you have a very proper fit and there's no sound leaking around these super flimsy silicone tips, which is going to happen with these tips. So whenever you read someone is saying, well, the ANC doesn't 90%, it actually is. You just need better tips. And I've never had a pair, and I don't have any really expensive ANC pairs, but on these, you can literally sit in front of a TV set and keep on pumping up the volume, and you can't hear it. It's pretty impressive. So I certainly believe in the 90% that they do. I just think it requires a very good fit and a very good seal inside of your ear. So ambient voice, the ambient noise around you, where it pipes in ambient noises, I think works super well. I was working outside, shoveling snow, and a neighbor would walk up and say, hey, and you kind of caught all the hey, all of his first words, and then once you start responding, voice detection takes over and lowers the volume of your music, and you could actually have a normal conversation without actually touching your earbuds, because again, you don't want to touch them because they're overly sensitive, but having a conversation without doing anything, just having ambient noise, pipe it in, voice detection to lower your music, and then it raises it back as soon as you're done talking, or I think 10 seconds after. So super nice. I think that they did a really good job on all three of those. So high marks on that. Much better than the ambient on the original buds. So again, this always works better if you have Samsung gear. So I have a Samsung phone. Samsung phones have the SSC, Samsung Scalable codec. It's a higher quality codec than AAC. If you go into developer settings, Bluetooth, look for HD audio. I believe that was actually unchecked on my phone when I got it. AVR CP version 1.6 should be on by default. And higher volume, because these buds they actually sound quite a bit better at higher volumes. At lower volumes, it does a very vocal focus thing, kind of if you were listening to a movie or a phone call. Pretty much the voices come through, but the music, the treble and the bass are going to be reduced quite a bit, so do pump them up a little bit. So what does it sound like? It sounds really, really good, but again, it's $200, so it really needs to sound really good. It's a warm V-shape. So Critical, who was a fan of this set as well, and he was a fan of, I think, most of the Galaxy Buds sets as well. So he graphed it out versus the Harman Target, and you can kind of see there's pretty much a little bump in the sub bass or bass 200, and then it stays pretty consistent, and then it kind of flies off at the upper end. But I'm not all that far from the Harman Target, which isn't a surprise, as I think Harman is a Samsung company as well. I think that's the relationship. So, warm V shape. So when we talk about the sound, the bass, and I think it's kind of hard to say. I think Critical had an idea why the bass was elevated at this point. I almost think that they're just overcompensating for the bad tips, because its bad tips are going to leak out some of your bass, so they overcompensated and bumped it up a little bit. But with proper tips and proper seal, it's a bit bassy and boomy, or it can be pretty good and spot on. There's just not much in between. There's not a whole lot of resolution and detail in the bass. It's kind of boomy or pretty good level anyway. So I wish it was a little tighter, a little faster, more textured. I think it's the weakest part of the sound. But if you like a bassier sound, it's Harman Target, so it's already bassier than some folks like, and then they added a little bit onto it, so it's a little bassy. So Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. I like that song. I didn't so much like it in the Super Bowl, but that song, that bass that goes on in the background, there's this kind of groovy bass that's happening in the background, almost turns droning bass on this one. It's a lot of bass, and it just kind of drones in your ear. So kind of at that bad side of that was one of those examples where I've heard it much better on other sets where it doesn't bother you to the point where it sounds like it's droning on and on. So could have been tighter, faster, a little reduced in that chart, but you have 5 or so EQ settings, and you can dial down the bass a little bit, but not a whole lot. It's with a proper seal, it's still going to be a little bassy. So the mids always have this vocal focus, and they're forward just as a TWS is kind of what you're expecting. These guys are great not only for music, but movies, games, podcasts, calls. The recurring theme in all of those is that midsection. So there's always this almost forward vocal, which is what you want. You don't want a recessed vocal on your phone call or a movie where you're trying to raise the volume just to hear what the dialogue is. So these are definitely not the vocals aren't recessed at all, and the lower in volume you go, sort of the more attention is given to the vocals to keep them at a level that you can hear them. So it's pretty cool in that way, but pretty typical for a TWS to keep it focused on that midsection. But really, as an IEM or just looking at it music, it's really detailed and really smooth and really natural. And the part that I would kind of ding it on is that clarity because of that bass, which just depends on what your music is. But if it's droning in the background, you're just not going to get that sense of clarity that you would because there's recurring weird bass going on in the background. So I'll ding it on that. And to be fair, Samsung added a clear setting on their EQ, and that helps a little bit with specifically that problem. But I don't necessarily want to keep on changing my EQ settings just to hear something with a little more clarity when they could have just dialed back the bass a little bit more. So cool song. Now You're Gone, the acoustic version by Tom Walker and Zara Larsson. And this is kind of where you get a sense of where the really sweet spot is on the Galaxy Bud Pro. And it's really this midsection, the upper midsection, and how detailed and smooth it is. And there's not like this, since I do a lot of budget Chi-Fi reviews, you always get that spicy upper mid, shouty upper mid. It's really hard to get a very high level of upper mid without it going too shouty or offensive or, hurting someone's ears. So, at the $200 level, that's kind of what you get is this very smooth transition from mids to upper mids. And when you listen to these two singing this acoustic version, his voice is a little lower. There's a really nice low end to it. And her voice absolutely pops on the upper side. And then you hear his and her contrasting voices over a piano, which is a little bit more of this deeper low end section. So not quite as detailed, but off in the background. And these two voices are forward and contrasting. Really, really nice. And so I will say, going back to this point of things that happen better on Samsung's, the amount of detail between HD audio and that codec, it's kind of up there. It's not wired level detail, but it's kind of surprisingly good. And I think it's probably about at the right price range anyway that you would expect. So, you still have to say it's Bluetooth and it's going to have some issues. And I think fortunately most of the issues are in the bass and not so much the midsection or the upper mid, because those come off as pretty well detailed. So the upper end, I think, is really where it shows its price. All that detail and resolution, it sounds like a natural dynamic driver. And this isn't a single dynamic driver, it's a dual, so there's a little tweeter in there as well. But the sound-wise, it's that cohesive where it's really hard to tell what the driver setup really is. It just sounds like a natural dynamic driver. And you take a look at like Blink-182, all the small things between the guitars going in the upper end, the drums at the lower end, the cymbal sounding natural and like a cymbal, not overly metallic, not overly bright, splashy. They sound just about right. But then you get the vocals right in the middle, plenty of space on staging. His vocals are a little forward, which on a lot of sets, his vocals actually fall backwards between the bass guitars and the drums. But on this one, there's just a really nice balance across, all the instruments with his vocals. And I'll say, even on this, with all this little bassy side, this version of that song, it's a bit fuller and a bit thicker because of the drums. And other sets, it's definitely a faster, lighter song, a faster, that transient response isn't super fast on this guy compared to other sets, but it's going back to this warm V shape. That's exactly what you would think it was going to sound like. And even Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, that section at 24 seconds, when it goes from that opening to that slower section, and those drums just hit really hard and really deep. And it sounds great, and it sounds just as you would expect it to sound like on a warm V-shaped dynamic driver. So I think they did a really great job there. So staging, there's some vocal height. The instruments actually tend to go pretty wide. The imaging and the separation, again, goes back to this basing. Depending on how much that bothers you, it's going to bother you here. Trying to isolate all the instruments with all that bass going on in the background. So I think that's sort of a challenge, and if that's a really priority for you, I would probably check with the other EQ settings. So I used mainly default, and if you think you were going to use the bass boost one, I think it's way too much. The clarity one, not so bad. Dynamic one, kind of hard to tell what's going on there. I think that's more for if you're really switching between movies and music, and it tends to try to do the best thing for what you're listening to. But if that separation and clarity sort of bothers you, I would definitely cycle through some of the other EQs and see how that works for you. So that's about it. That's my take on the Galaxy Buds Pro. Lots of stuff going on there. But if you do find yourself with a pair of Galaxy Buds Pro, I would most definitely figure out how to get some tips, because the stock tips are just no good. And it's going to fall out of your ear. It's going to be, a $200 bud hitting the ground, which is not what you really want. And I do hope that Samsung addresses that whole locking in the ear situation, make it insert a little deeper, maybe extend the nozzle a little bit. They got to do something that's to bring it more in line with where the original OG buds were. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.